Good evening and happy Passover. I'm Elizabeth George, Chief Membership Officer with the American Guild of Organists. And boy, am I excited about tonight's webinar. And from the list of registrants that have signed up for this webinar, I hope you are too. I think you are. Just a couple of housekeeping notes before we get started. This is being recorded, and probably within the next 48 hours, we will be sending the link to the recording to everyone, every single member, along with a handout. And you are muted, but we do want to hear from you because I'm sure you're going to have questions. So please do post them in the Q&A icon that is at the bottom of your screen. I'm going to be monitoring that throughout Katie's presentation, and we will hopefully be able to get to all of your questions and have answers for them. So let me tell you a little bit about our presenter tonight. Dr. Katie Deaver serves as Associate General Manager at One License, and she's love of music and religion has allowed her to serve in a variety of many different music ministries, as well as to study and teach religion. And she's also involved with feminist theology, I like that, and ethics. She lives in beautiful Marquette, Michigan, and is an alumna of Luther College, and also the Lutheran School of Theology in Chicago, where she earned degrees as a Master of Theology and a Doctor of Philosophy. So without further ado, Katie, the floor is yours.
Well, thank you so much. First of all, thank you so much for the invite. I'm excited to be able to connect with AGO folks. I'm an organist myself and was a student member of AGO for several years during my time at Luther and the beginnings of my time in Chicago as well. I know it's been several years, I think, since One License has been able to be a part of one of these webinars. I think back in September of 2020, perhaps, was the last time. And as I'm sure all of you have experienced, we've all been through a lot and learned a lot in those 3.5, almost 4 years. So I'm excited to share some of what One License has learned during that time that will hopefully make your ministries and your music making a little bit easier and, just a little bit less stressful. I think sometimes these copyright questions and concerns can leave us feeling a little anxious and a little unsure of what we're doing or what we should be doing, if we're doing enough. And so our hope at One License has been and continues to be to help you feel confident that you know what is required when it comes to copyright, and then also to make those requirements as painless and simple and easy for you as possible, whether it's our service or if we can send you to a partner organization or something like that. We certainly want to help in any way that we can as we all navigate these copyright compliance questions together. As Elizabeth said, we'll do our best to get through all of your questions tonight. But sometimes we wake up in the middle of the night with a whole new question or something like that. Please don't hesitate to reach out to our team. You can email us at info@onelicense.net. Feel free to ask for Katie directly, and that'll get to me, or to reference this webinar. And if our team isn't able to assist, they'll send it off to me so that I can speak directly to the things we talk about tonight. So I will go ahead and sort of just jump in and look forward to hearing what questions some of this inspires, and we'll go from there. So one of the big questions that we hear a lot, especially from AGO members, is how exactly One License can cover the types of events that AGO members or chapters are putting on. So your first sort of line of inquiry, right, is to determine whether or not the type of event you have in mind is something that One License can cover. So the big broad stroke, right, is that One License is able to cover worship services. Now, we all know as church musicians, right, there's some flexibility with what is a worship service, what is an event in the life of the church. So we can ask you some additional questions to see if your event is considered a worship service. Really what we're looking for, are there significant worship components in that event? Is there congregational hymn singing? Is there maybe some sort of a prayer or a scripture reading, something that leads itself to being a worship service? So that's sort of your first question to dig into. The second question is whether or not the event is non-commercial. So part of that worship exemption that we're thinking about as musicians is also ensuring that it's commercial. These aren't a profit-based sort of an event. You're not selling a CD or trying to make a profit off an event in that way. If your event does qualify as both of those things, it's a worship service or it has those significant worship type components and it's non-commercial, then there's a pretty good chance that one license will be able to cover that event. Anytime you're not sure, and you'll hear me say this a lot tonight, reach out to our team. We're really great at sort of asking you the right questions to help you dig in and know whether or not what you're describing is something we can cover. And if we can't cover it, we'll know who to send you to so that you can obtain the permissions that you need for that event. The other thing that we hear a lot when it comes to this is whether an AGO chapter can hold its own license. So the short answer is you absolutely can. The way that we would figure that out is a little unique. So for example, those who are familiar with one license, our licenses are based on your average weekly attendance for all the services that take place in a typical week. Certainly that is not an easy number probably for most AGO chapters to come up with, unless, I mean, maybe you're very, very active and you're holding worship services weekly like a typical church community. But you're welcome to reach out to our team. We have some special formulas and some questions we'll ask you to help determine what a good category size for you might be. Your other option, of course, is that if your event is being hosted by your local congregation, and hosted meaning not just that it's taking place in their worship space necessarily, but maybe they're going to post the video on their YouTube channel. So they're going to do some promotion for that. They're going to have that online video posted on their website, their channel, all of those things. It could be that if they're willing, you're able to utilize their regular one license congregational license to cover your event. The thing to keep in mind, if that is a setup that works for you and that church, is that you're going to want to make sure that your event and that anticipated attendance for your event still fits within the church's category size. A lot of the time, right, churches are on the low end of their category or somewhere in the middle. So a few larger events aren't going to greatly shift that. But on the other hand, you know, if their category is good for up to 200 and they regularly worship about 198, then maybe, you know, we'll want to bump them up a category size, or you'll want to look into a single use or an event license or something like that. There again, reach out to our team. We can help you figure out what is going to get you the coverage that you need, but also be the most cost effective for your chapters, for us as individual musicians. I know sometimes when we want the licensing that we know we need, that comes out of our own pockets because we know it's important. And we're not always in situations where our communities are able to understand that importance. So we can certainly work with you to make sure you have a quality, cost-effective option for whatever you need. The other thing to keep in mind when trying to determine what is going to be the best fit for a particular event you're having, our license is only able to cover the full service or the full worship event in one solid piece, so not individual titles. So for example, if you were hoping to host an individual organ piece on your YouTube channel, you're going to want to go directly to the copyright holder for those permissions, or potentially to performance rights agencies. So something like Christian Copyright Solutions, BMI, some of those options that are not specifically geared toward worship services, but instead are more performance or PRO based. So you certainly have options. There again, you're welcome to reach out to our team, tell us, give us an idea what it is you're trying to do, and we can help point you in the right direction, even if one license isn't going to be able to offer you the coverage that you need. The other thing we hear quite often from our AGO folks and also from many choir directors and handbell directors is how tough it can sometimes be to find instrumental and choral works in the One License database. So I mentioned earlier, the last time that Brenna was with you all on behalf of One License was September of 2020, and I believe she mentioned in that meeting there were about 80,000 titles in the One License database. So today, when I checked, we are just shy of 234,000 titles in the One License database. So to say that our member publishers have worked hard to get their instrumental and choral titles into the database would be an understatement. They truly have just been rock stars about trying to get all of these organ pieces, handbell pieces. There are quite a good amount of string options, some brass options in there now, as well as lots of choral music. It really is. There's just so much more that is available for podcast streaming that wasn't there in 2020 and certainly wasn't there pre-2020 when so many less organizations were using that podcast streaming license. So that being said, with so many titles in the database, as you can imagine, searching through all of that data, you have to be a little more creative. And you also have to find ways to search that are really smart. So if you take one thing away from our time together tonight with the One License system, let it be this. The easiest, fastest, most reliable way to search our system is going to be just typing that title and contributor last name directly in the search bar. If you're familiar with our site, you've seen, lots of bells and whistles. You can narrow things. You can look for only specific things. All of those features are wonderful, and they all have, a time and place where that's going to be the best choice. 99% of the time, when I do my own reporting for my church job, I just type title and contributor last name right in the search bar. Most of the time, that's going to give you the title you're looking for in that first 5 to 6 resources. And you're going to know that you're at least on the right track, or that maybe you need to tighten up your search strategy just a little bit from there. The other thing that is a new development since 2020, but really in the last year and a half or so, you might be familiar with manual submissions to our system. So previously, if you submitted a manual submission for a piece, you couldn't go any further than the weeks that were open for reporting. So in a lot of cases, even those of us who are trying to plan, choral anthems or instrumental music, handbell pieces, 6 months or more on a great day, right? Out in front, we weren't able to request that those titles be added to the system or to submit those manual submissions until we were already within 6 weeks, 4 to 6 weeks from the date we hope to use those. Now you can actually submit those manual submissions up to a year in advance. The hope with that change is right, it encourages those of us who are able to plan ahead to get those permissions sooner, so that by the time we do actually use the piece, they're in the system. We feel reassured that it's been reported and we're doing everything that we needed to use that piece. But it also gives our member publishers significantly more time to verify, to check in with you, or to check in with other copyright holders to make sure that they're able to provide those approved types of usage under their own agreements. As many of us are probably familiar with, copyrights can and do change hands, sometimes because smaller companies close down or are purchased by larger companies, things like that. Sometimes it has to do with families being able to renew particular copyrights that have been in place after the passing of the original composer. So all of those pieces are going on behind the scenes, and it in some cases may be that the member publisher has to do a lot of reaching out and double checking with other publishers or with family members to verify what usage they're able to grant to One License, so that then we as the church musicians can use those titles. So know that anytime that you don't find a title that you hope to use in our system, those manual submissions are a great way to ask the publishers to add that data to the system. Those are sent directly to the member publisher that you select when you fill them out. So it's certainly worth giving them as much detail as you can to try and help them track down what this piece is and determine if they're able to list it in our system for your use. Another piece that I think frequently comes up, especially for us as organists, right, is trying to find the individual pieces in some of our companion magazines or old resources. I know as a music major at Luther, it wasn't unusual for music faculty to sort of discard some of their older resources or things they didn't use so that music majors would be able to have these new resources. Some of my favorite books are still quite old resources that were handed down by faculty members and friends and things of that nature. But sometimes it's hard to track down who owns the copyright now. Maybe the original copyright holder publishing company has closed. Maybe those copyrights were bought by a different publisher. All of those things can be really tricky to keep track of and to keep up with. Google or regular internet search engines are certainly helpful, but you're always welcome to reach out to our team. Sometimes we have a little bit of an idea where titles ended up or who purchased which ones, or we at least have contact with publishers who might have more of that sort of insider information to be able to pass along. Anytime you're using those instrumental collections or worship planning editions that maybe have a variety of preludes or postludes on particular hymn tunes, things like that, always make sure that you're looking at the copyright on the individual pieces rather than the edition itself. So some of the predecessor organizations to One License had them enter their data in a little bit different way. So many of the member publishers are working on cleaning this up. But the hope is, here again, if you're looking at your title and your composer, searching that in the system should bring it up for you no matter what resource it's a part of. I know Lorenz actually just added several of their sort of magazine-based church music resources to the hymnal and resource dropdown. So those you'll actually be able to search by the page number in that booklet. It'll probably be a few weeks. They're still adding some of that data, but that is going to be something that potentially is going to help. Part of what can be tricky with those collections as well is that sometimes, as we know, right, there's this assumption that playing Bach or something from the classical era, something from the Baroque era will automatically mean that it's public domain. And of course, that isn't always the case. It's not unusual for those editions to have particular changes that have been copyrighted. So it also does matter that paying attention to the specific version you're playing out of when you're trying to determine which piece is the copyright that you need to report. So there again, just being sure that you're looking at that copyright on the individual piece rather than the collection or the booklet as a whole is going to make that much easier so that you can kind of track this down and get a feel for who needs to have that reported to them. On the One License side of things, you're always going to end up getting the most specific details and the most accurate results for the type of license you hold when you're logged in. One of the things that our IT team is currently working on developing is helping some of the instrumental and choral titles come up to the top sooner when you're not logged in. Right now, you'll notice if you're not logged into the One License site and you search the public page, it's going to preference things that have a congregational reprint usage allowance, since that was sort of, One License's starting point. that search is going to try and show you the things that are available for congregational reprint. For those of us who are looking more to see what's available on the instrumental side, on the choral side, things we're going to use in those online services, it's going to be much easier if you log in. If you don't have a license yet, or maybe you have a reprint license at your church, but you know you need to check some of these online usage options, there again, feel free to reach out to our team and we can let you know what's in the system, the type of permission it's approved for, and answer any additional questions that you might have when it comes to those.
Katie, we do have some questions.
Perfect.
I'm going to got about 6 of them here. All right.
Excellent.
Okay. My church has a one license, but I've never sent in the hymn information. How far back should I go?
I mean, I don't want to terrify you, but as far back as you're able to. um, so we really do pay out for every single report that is made. So every song that you're able to go back and add directly translates into a royalty payment for that publisher or that contributor. I would say most of the time we ask folks to go at least a year into the past if they're able to do so and they have that data. We can also come up with some creative ways for you to make those reports as well. We've had folks who, for example, if you know you always use the same liturgy or the same mass for Advent, great, go ahead and, maybe you've used it for the last 10 years. Super, go in and report that mass for 10 years times 4 weeks, and that is just fine. And you're welcome to put, by the way, those reports in any of the currently open weeks. We're not able to reopen weeks once they close, but we're very, very happy to receive those reports no matter how old they are. And our composers and publishers are absolutely happy to receive the royalties as well.
Thank you. We have another question. A number of works, and I think you may have already addressed this, a number of works in the search results on one license's site don't list any copyright information, only the title and composer. Why is that? And how is that different from the entries that have the full copyright info displayed?
Great question. So sometimes it's intentional on the part of the copyright holder, and other times it is I think less intentional, or they think they will confuse the user less by not having the copyright there. So sometimes they hide that copyright because they know the title is going to change hands, or it recently has changed hands. And so they intentionally don't have that copyright. You will see it after you report the title. Really worry less about the copyright matching as long as everything else matches, since those do change hands. If your title and your contributor data all match, that's going to be what's most important. And then you and we will just trust the data that the composers and publishers have in our system. Keep in mind too, right, that as soon as something is hard copy printed, it's already out of date. But our system, they can literally change the copyright and it'll take effect for you on your report in that same minute. So there are significant times where, the score that I'm playing from might have an Oxford copyright, but perhaps, and this is not a great example, but let's say now, as of today, Wild Goose owns that copyright. So even though I'm playing out of Oxford's score, someone else now manages that. And it's totally fine for me to continue playing out of that older score, and I'll still see that Oxford copyright, even if they don't continue to hold it. So just trust your title and your contributor first and foremost. And then as long as those match, you can rest assured that you're reporting the correct title.
Okay, well, we have another one here. I recently tried to submit a title that was listed as reprint and not streaming. I was told to reach out to the publisher, I think you just discussed this, as they are the ones who say which way to list. They were not aware that it was incorrectly listed and fixed it.
Perfect. We love that. That's a perfect example of how it's supposed to work, right? So as you can imagine, right, especially some of these large publishing houses, they have literally tens of thousands of titles in our system. And so especially some older titles that may have originally been entered before podcast streaming and putting worship services online was so popular. A lot of that older data was only approved for reprint because at the time that was really the only license that we offered. And publishers do have to physically go in and change. They can either add or take away those usage permissions. But yes, that is perfect. If you see a title in the system that doesn't have the type of usage that you need, reach out to that copyright holder directly, and they'll be able to make that update. Or in some cases, they may not be able to allow that usage, and then they'll be able to explain to you why and how you can get those permissions.
Thank you. This is interesting. If there isn't permission for podcasting on a piece, then we need to mute that part of the service on the podcast.
That is an option. Yep. So if you don't have, if our system doesn't show podcast streaming, maybe you reached out to the copyright holder and they didn't get back to you, muting that song is an option. It's certainly not, ideal. We spend a lot of time and effort, right, preparing this music, and we want to be able to share it with our communities. But that is one way to do that. Also, then if you do mute it, and the next week a publisher says, "Oh, yep, you absolutely can use that," then you can unmute it, and you're just fine to have it once you have that permission.
Thank you. We have another question. You mentioned church attendance as a factor in license grouping. Is that average in-person attendance plus average YouTube views?
Great question. Yes. So if you have that online license or if you're holding services online, yep, we're looking for all the in-person and then also those online views. We do have some resources on our blog, news.onelicense.net, that help you actually get a better idea what that online view number is, right? Because we're not really talking about, the quick scrolls or some of those. We really are looking for organization size. So we have some resources to help you determine what that number really looks like.
Okay, great. I have had problems in the past of streams being flagged due to copyright. One example, I played The Barber, Adagio for Strings by William Strickland, which got flagged because the London Philharmonic holds a copyright for their performance. I tried to appeal numerous times, but was denied. Do you have any advice?
That is great question. So um the beauty of social media, right? And online worship. So we joked a lot, I think back in 2020 that if folks were placing claims like that, you should absolutely take it as a compliment. That anything we're doing in our churches sounds as good as a master recording or as good as the London Symphony, all of those things. But we are a little limited. So the big one, of course, is to make sure that you have not only the copyright information for the pieces that you're playing, but also your one license or any other licensing agency that you're using to cover those titles, that information in the video description, and then also in a comment, if possible. So we've been working pretty closely with Sony Publishing because so many of our users were receiving these claims and they would dispute them and not win and have trouble with their channels. And it is, right? It's really, really stressful. And the big thing that Sony told us is that they've started having less bots just scan those videos and more actual humans take a look. And when the actual team members are taking a look, they're looking at those video descriptions and then they're looking at the first couple of comments to see if the copyright information is there and then to see what licensing agency you're claiming you have a license with. Obviously, that doesn't work all the time, but hopefully it'll cut down on those a little bit for you. Great questions.
Okay, here's another one. If we use Psalm settings for Sundays and Seasons, Lutheran resource, do we need to report them?
Great question. So it sort of depends on the specific resource that you're using. So Augsburg, don't want to speak on behalf of Augsburg. They tend to have their own liturgy license. And I know from my own reporting, a good chunk of those Psalms, if it's an Augsburg copyright, are part of that add-on liturgies license. It doesn't hurt to check and see if they're in our system. If they're in our system, you're welcome to report them. Otherwise, if it isn't an Augsburg copyright, I would say reach out to Sundays and Seasons and just verify which should be reported which place. For the most part, anything from Sundays and Seasons, I end up reporting with one license. And the exception to that is typically just their liturgies.
This is interesting. Should pieces and copyright information be listed in the church bulletin as well as in the online stream?
Great question. I think it's nice, right? I think it's one of those pieces that probably isn't 100% necessary if we're thinking about only a copyright focus. But I think, being able to sort of give credit where credit is due, so to speak, and help our congregations to know what musicians are preparing and what pieces we're playing in these services is certainly a good idea.
Uh, when our AGO chapters have member recitals in a given church, how should the literature be listed and under whose license?
Great question. And that really is sort of one of those gray area pieces. The general rule of thumb, if it is, a worship event, so it's something that one license can cover in that sense, then start to think about who is hosting. And by hosting, we don't necessarily just mean the physical space, but where is that video going to be posted, right? So if it's going to be live streamed on the church Facebook page, probably the church that we would recommend hold that license. On the other hand, if the AGO chapter wants to be able to put it on their YouTube, then we probably would recommend that the chapter hold the license. So for all of those, we certainly can cover a good mixture of anything that you can come up with. But I would suggest reaching out to our team with specifics, and we'll make the best recommendation for your situation.
This is interesting. A previous webinar by One License said that YouTube videos only needed to have the copyright and license info somewhere in the video, not necessarily in the video's description. My church has a slide at the end of the service that includes all this info, but YouTube bots keep saying this video potentially has copyrighted material. Should we change our habits?
Great question. And you are absolutely right. That it has been the sort of our company line, so to speak, for a long chunk of this time, is to have that in the video. We're hearing from these bigger companies now, they want it in the description and they want it in a comment. I would say still leave it in the video because I think that helps too. But really they're looking at that description and then that comment. So if you can get it in those places as well, again, it should really help cut down on some of those claims and strikes.
And I believe, well, I won't answer this. Is there a way to get on the One License newsletter mailing list? Is that available on your website if they go there?
Absolutely. Yep. And you are welcome if you want to just email us at info@onelicense.net. We can absolutely get you added. If that email address is in your One License account, if you log in, there's actually a little box next to your user and you can check yourself to receive the newsletter, but we're happy to help you do that as well. We can also double check every once in a while. An older email address will have started to spam them, or something like that. So we're always able to check and make sure that you're receiving those the way you want to.
Okay, I think I've got one more question here. Our church is hosting a visiting choir and will not know what the visiting group is singing. There will be no program printed. What should we be responsible for? Well, I'd reach out to them and ask them what they plan to sing, but you please answer this.
That's right. I mean, that is certainly a piece of it. Yeah. If you're able to reach out and get them to give you some specifics, that's certainly best case and probably the least stressful for you for sure. But there again, you can be a little bit careful. Maybe if you don't get the list, just plan to mute certain titles that you don't think sound like they come from a member publisher. um, a lot of copyright, we talk a lot about due diligence and doing everything we can. There are also things that we can absolutely fix after the fact. So, we don't want to not bring choirs in or have guest musicians because copyright is so complicated. So do what you can to get the details ahead of time so that we can help make sure they're covered and help connect you to those copyright holders. But also, if they show up Saturday night and they do, an encore piece that you were not expecting and you don't know if it's covered, we can help you with that Monday and it'll be just fine.
Well, I think that's about it. I appreciate all of these questions that you've been able to answer, and I know our participants are grateful for this information. And I just want to say thank you so much, Katie. It has been such a joy to get to know you, and I appreciate you so much being able to really clarify some things for us, and as well offering the discount to our members. So we appreciate that. And just so everyone knows, you can log into OnCard, use your credentials to log in on our website. And we have a new tab called Member Benefits, which will list all the details of the one license benefits to our members. I just want to say, I hope you'll join us next Monday because we will be having a webinar actually about another new member benefit, and it is about Hauptwerk. So Brett Milan, who is the president and CEO and founder of Milan Digital Audio, will be there, and he will be facilitating a panel discussion. And the members on the panel will be actually members of the AGO. So I think this is going to be a really interesting webinar, and I feel like I've learned a new language, Hauptwerk. I mean, I knew French and I knew Italian and German. Now I'm learning Hauptwerk. But in any event, I want to thank everybody for attending tonight. And Katie, thank you again so very much. We really appreciate it. And, we might just have to have you come back again.
Absolutely. Anytime. Thank you so much. It's just wonderful to be able to connect with folks. And yeah, I just appreciate the invite. Thank you.
Wonderful. Well, thank you so much. Take care, everyone. And we hope we'll see you next Monday.